Hello, my name is Tommy Pigott. Welcome to the Republican Rundown. I'm here with Anna Kelly and Matt Middleton. Thanks so much for joining the Rundown this week. What I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about is really Biden's warped priorities. He's spending the week at fundraisers, fundraiser after fundraiser after fundraiser, not one, not two, but many, 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 many. And I think the contrast with what's going on in the world versus this fundraisers is so stark. So to start the conversation, I wanted to play and remind everyone watching what's going on in the Middle East right now. If we could play that first clip, please.
Multiple U.S. officials tell CNN that negotiations over the release of additional hostages in Gaza appear highly unlikely to resume anytime soon. The White House has said there's one American woman and 7 men unaccounted for after the October 7th Hamas attacks. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says securing their release is of paramount priority.
So potentially 8 Americans being held hostage. I mean, Anna, when you see Biden at fundraisers with this going on, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking to see what these families are going through. And I think it's really an insult to them. I know that we saw several of those families go on CNN over the weekend and talk about the fact that they feel left behind. I don't know if we have that clip as well. But, you know, it's absolutely heartbreaking, the fact that Joe Biden would rather spend time with his coastal elite donors than work every single day to bring these Americans home. I mean, we are now at over 2 months since those initial attacks on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas. And, you know, our president should be leading the way and making sure that we bring those Americans home. It's absolutely a travesty that that's not happening at the level it should be.
Yeah, I think we actually do have that clip as well. If we could play that second clip of some of the family members of the hostages.
We have heard President Biden expressing the hostages as top priority. But we're still sitting here 54 days later with 8 of us, 8 families, still waiting for the loved ones.
So that was last week. We're looking at over 60 days now. Matt, when you hear that father, those family members saying that Biden's not doing enough, that we don't have answers yet, and yet he's going into fundraisers, what do you think when you see this contrast?
Yeah, well, I think it even goes beyond the hostages, right? I mean, you also have service members that are facing attacks in the Red Sea, in Iraq, folks that, you know, are putting their lives on the line every single day for our country. And you have a president who's not able to spend, you know, a weekend focusing on their well-being or really what's going on in the region. It's just tough to see. And, you know, as far as the hostages go, I think it goes even a step further, right? I think we're at the point now where we're worried about how our president is going to be able to negotiate, how some of these prisoners are released, how, you know, he's almost every step of the way appeased the Iranian regime, you know, given way to Iranian proxies. You know, just the fact that he's allowed $80 billion worth of oil sales, you know, allowed to continue. It's a little bit tough to figure out what the priorities are in the White House and how they're going to be solving some of these issues that really go beyond just the Middle East. And we can talk about more of them.
And no, I think that's a great point when you're talking about the fact that you have Hamas, which is backed by Iran. I mean, there's not a American out there that denies that Hamas is backed by Iran to a large degree. You have $80 billion flowing from to Iran, which is the largest, like we just said, sponsor of Hamas. With these Iranian-backed proxies attacking American troops in the region, you have hostages being held by Hamas, and you have Biden, who's out there, one, claiming success, this administration out there claiming success every day when it comes to this, and then he's clearly not prioritizing the return of these Americans. How can he justify, and what could he possibly be fundraising on when American troops are under attack and you have hostages being held right now by Hamas 2 months after this heinous and brutal attack by the terrorist organization?
Right. He's basically taking the week off to do that. And I think one point that gets lost, 2 months later, is the fact that we still unfroze those funds for Iran after this horrific attack, right? And let's also not forget that there have been a number of other countries that secured their hostages. I know that there have been 23 Thai hostages that have been released, 1 Filipino hostage. So other countries are able to do that. Our problem is we have just feckless, weak leadership in the White House that emboldens our enemies and allows terrorist groups like Hamas to feel like they can continue to get away with this. It's an absolute travesty.
I do think that's an important question of Biden, who was taking credit for negotiating this agreement. They out there and they took credit on X, on other platforms, saying we negotiated this agreement for that ceasefire, that truce. And then you have Americans who are still being held hostage, and he doesn't even know where they are. We don't even know what condition. The reason why we have to say potentially 8 hostages is because they didn't even bother to confirm the number of hostages that Hamas had while they're taking credit for negotiating this deal. How can they go out there and claim that that's a success when you have Americans who still need answers about where their family members are?
Yeah, well, and they can't even get it on message within their own White House, right? I mean, you have interns calling for a ceasefire today, right? So there are a lot of misplaced priorities, and I think part of that goes to just them not having a succinct message on supporting Israel, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway that we need to take from all of this, is that we have to support our ally Israel. We have to make sure that they're doing everything they can to bring those hostages back, right? And that's, whether that's supporting more arms to Israel, whether that's just supplying aid, those things have to happen so we can be in a position where we can get those hostages back. And it just doesn't seem like those initiatives are, really happening at the moment, and it's sad to see.
Yeah, we have no. We're united here at the RNC and the Republican Party in supporting Israel. That's for sure. I mean, the DNC may be divided, but we're not divided here in that, which is, I think, really important. I think you mentioned misplaced priorities, and it is so clear when it comes to this war in the Middle East. I think it's also clear when it comes to the border, because it's not just crises happening overseas. It's crises happening here at home while Biden is fundraising. If we could play, just to give people at home a chance to see what's going on at the border, that recent clip that played on Fox News.
Take a look at this video out of Border Patrol San Diego sector. News Nation capturing this footage of a large amount of Chinese male nationals that crossed illegally near the Jacumba Hot Springs area. So this is happening all along our southern border, guys. The entire world is showing up here at our doorstep. They're crossing illegally, and they are expecting to get released here into the United States.
So you have the entire world showing up at our southern border expecting to be released. When you hear that, what do you think when Biden's out there fundraising while we have this completely open border and people from all over the world that are trying to cross?
Yeah, and again, he's taking the week off to do this. Meanwhile, I know that we talked about this ahead of the debate again as well. But we also, while all this horrific stuff is going on in the world, we also have 150 people who were on the terror watch list that we caught trying to cross our border. And that's just the people we caught. How many more got away? So yeah, again, it's an example of this really absent leadership. He's only been to the border once, I believe, and that was really just more of a photo op than anything. And the American people don't want him to be at fundraisers right now. They want him to be at the border or leading to get these American hostages home.
Yeah, again, I think the question is, what are you fundraising on when you have all these crises that are going on? Matt, you're research department research director here at the RNC. Every month when these border numbers come out, pulls these numbers, updates these numbers. Anna mentioned the gotaways. What are we looking at in terms of gotaways, and what is a gotaway for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, just to kind of put this all into perspective, since Biden's been president, there have been 8.2 million folks that have been tried to go across the border. And some of them, for instance, you're talking about the 1.7 million gotaways, are folks that Border Patrol tried to apprehend or were able to witness crossing the border, but were unable to catch, essentially, and to essentially figure out who they were, right? And so I think the scariest thing, Anna talked about, the 169 terrorists that we have caught attempting to cross the border just this year, which, as looking back over the past 6 years, is more than that total combined. The scary reality is we just don't know who those people are. And so as those numbers continue to rise, there's obviously the national security problem. You have the humanitarian crisis that comes out of all of this because we don't know how to deal with all these people that are crossing the border. You have blue states, blue cities now that are realizing the issue as it is unfolding. But unfortunately, it's too little too late. And the administration really doesn't seem to have a plan of how they want to go about dealing with this issue.
Yeah, what's maybe ironic, if that's the correct word, is that he's going to all these blue cities. He was in Boston. Earlier this week, for example, there's a state of emergency that's been declared in Massachusetts on this issue. Eric Adams saying it will destroy New York City. That's his word, destroy New York City. The 1.7 million gotaways, we don't know where they are, what they're doing, what they brought in terms of lethal drugs. I mean, this contrast between Biden fundraising in these blue cities with these mega donors versus what's happening on the streets in these blue cities is quite stark, I think.
Right, and let's not forget about New York Governor Kathy Hochul as well, who was expressed a lot of concern about the number of illegal immigrants that are in her state as well. You know, and then meanwhile, you have Democrats also now tying border security funding to Ukraine funding, right? So yeah, I mean, they are just all over the map on this. They can't agree on a concise message when Americans are resoundingly concerned over the influx of illegal immigration and also the fentanyl coming in, which has made every single state in this country a border state. So yeah, I mean, Americans by and large see that Republicans are leading the way on this. We are the ones who put forward H.R. 2, the largest border security bill really in history. And of course, that's now being stalled by Chuck Schumer, also from New York. So they are all over the map on this, but I think Americans resoundingly know that Republicans are the one who are leading on this issue.
Not only is he fundraising on a record of chaos, his administration Democrats are actively blocking an effort that would secure this border. And it's not just a money issue, it's a policy issue. It's been clear from the beginning. You know, I could almost see in their minds on day one saying, oh, these policies will work, we got to give them a try. I mean, we were warning about that at the time, but it's been years now. How do they justify doubling down on policies that have so evidently failed?
Yeah. Spectacularly. It's truly a tragedy. I mean, it talks about fentanyl. I mean, it's become the largest killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45, right? And so there really is no community that goes untouched by the fentanyl crisis, which obviously is a result of the border crisis, right? And so how states are responding to this is, you know, evident in what, you know, a lot of places are sending National Guard down to the border or sending resources down to the border. And I think the overwhelming question that so many Americans have is, when will the federal government start sending that support? When will Joe Biden realize that this is an issue that is across parties, you know, across demographics, right? This is an issue that's affecting every single American family.
And I think, Anna, you made that point too, that every state's a border state. I mean, the fact that you have states across the country, Republican-led states, sending National Guard. New York is not on the southern border. I mean, I think that's obvious for everybody, but they are just as much affected as anybody else. And it's because of Joe Biden and his policies that they are.
Right. Imagine how much worse the situation would be if we didn't have people like Governor Greg Abbott from Texas and his Operation Lone Star really leading the way on this issue, making sure that Texans aren't dealing with the extreme level of immigration that they could be, and it's already an extreme level. I also kind of want to go back to Matt's point. I know that Mayorkas said this week on CNN that border security measures are, quote, violence to our fundamental values. So after years of kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth on this, I think they're finally, you know, at least honest with the American people that they're never going to secure this border.
That was absolutely outrageous. I mean, if he views doing his job as violence, to use his word, he should resign. I mean, there's no excuse for that. I mean, I think I was touching on this contrast between what people are experiencing in their everyday life and his priorities, and the fact that he's going to these mega donors. Is also this issue that's been pressing for a very long time, but Biden seems determined to ignore, which is East Palestine, Ohio. East Palestine, Ohio, who suffered that really tragic train derailment that did so much damage, and Biden is nowhere to be found. And I just want to remind people that when we say Biden's nowhere to be found, it's a real broken promise from Joe Biden. If we could play Joe Biden back on March 2nd.
Visit Ohio to discuss the situation there with the trade development with people there for federal assistance.
I've spoken with every official in Ohio, Democrat and Republican, on a continuous basis, as in Pennsylvania. I laid out a little bit in there what I think the answers are. We put it together, and we will be implementing an awful lot into the legislation here, and I will be able to do it.
So it's been 280 days since Biden promised to visit East Palestine, Ohio. Do you think that he's ever going to visit East Palestine at this point?
My personal opinion is maybe not. I could see it being a situation where maybe he decides during the presidential campaign that it may be worth to go stop and see some voters in Ohio. But, you know, the honest reality is, I mean, if he hasn't visited yet, I mean, the crisis is not going to be getting any better anytime soon, and there's no reason he shouldn't have done it already. But I mean, the greater point is that, you know, if this wasn't technically flyover country, he would have been there already, you know, and that's the unfortunate reality, is that these people are suffering on the ground because they're not in a place that the Democrats view as important to their, larger margins anymore.
And we're talking about months. I mean, what do you think it sends for Joe Biden to not go to East Palestine, but literally be traveling every single day this week, hosting multiple fundraisers?
Yeah, it's one of his many broken promises, right? And it's a shame that there's not any fancy donors, I guess, in East Palestine, Ohio, for him to go visit, because otherwise he'd probably be there. But yeah, I mean, look at the entire past 3 years of his presidency. He said before his chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal that, quote, if there are American citizens left, we're going to stay until we get them all out. Of course, we know that didn't happen. There are as many as 9,000 Americans who were left behind in that chaotic withdrawal. He said you get the opioid crisis under control. Of course, we have historic levels of fentanyl coming into the country. He said he would get our economy back on track. Of course, that didn't happen. So I think, the people of East Palestine see, and all Americans see, that this is just one example of the many broken promises that have characterized this administration.
And again, 307 days since that toxic train derailment, 280 days since he promised to go. You outlined all those failures. Big question is, what is he fundraising on? It seems like communities forgotten, surging prices, world in chaos, wide open border. Doesn't seem like a record to fundraise on to me. Thank you so much for joining the Republican Rundown this week, breaking all that down. We'll be back next week with even more stats and figures and more information that you need to know.